And I think that's a great place to begin, because not letting yourself off the hook.
Never let yourself off the hook,
I think that's
ever.
another tennis rocker's sort of, I don't know if you want to call it a value, but it's just not letting yourself off the hook, right?
I use it all the time in lessons. I'll say to somebody, hey, we're going to warm up and I need you to do X, Y, and Z. And after about 5-10 minutes, they start looking at the clock and I'm like, I'm not going to let you off the hook. Do you want me to? And then you can tell they're being like called out.
Right.
Right. And like, no.
And there's that uncomfortable moment where they just for a second, they'd love to sit there and look at you and say, yeah, I would actually.
Right. Or is he really going to make me rally to 100? And if I don't get there, we're never going to back off the service line? Yes. It's going to be a long hour of mini tennis. 100. Oh, 99. Here we go again. But why do you want to let
But I find that
yourself off the hook?
fascinating that you're not willing. I find that fascinating. You're not willing to risk your money, which I find that fascinating, because I think that there's people out there, I'm sure of it, that there's people out there that would coaches that would let people off the hook because they don't want the guy to sit there and come back or just text them next week and say, you know what, I'm kind of done. I'll see you later. Like, you're not afraid of that. I give you a lot of credit for that. A lot of credit, because But
I'll tell you why.
Lesser people, I might be afraid of that. I mean, honestly, you know.
But I'll tell you why. Because I spent many a year trying to be somebody I wasn't, and when I discovered my path, the way that Sully needed to go,
your approach within coaching
or my music career, whatever it may be, because I went the corporate route of, going to college and trying to blah, blah, blah. And this is the safe way. And that wasn't me. And so I was pretending. I was pretending to be somebody I wasn't, being like, oh, look, I have money and look at my minivan I've got with my suit, going to my job. And I mean, it's fine if that's what you want and that's who you are, but that wasn't who I was. So when I went through my metamorphosis and was like, wait a minute, who am I? What am I about? What are my values? What's my value system? And what are the core things that make me me? And when I figured that out and I started pursuing that, even when I had money or didn't have money doing the music thing, I always felt like me. And then when I got into tennis, because my music career went belly up and my boss tagged me for coaching with no experience at all and not having having played mediocre tennis growing up.
This is 20 years ago.
Yeah, this is 20 years ago. You're right, 20 years ago. I was like, okay, well, he was like, dude, just do you. And I was like, okay, I'll just do my values and I'll try to fit in the tennis around that.
Yeah.
And I based it on that because I remember what it was like putting on the monkey suit and pretending to be somebody I wasn't.
So when you first started coaching, though, did you obviously you were like anybody who's beginning something new in that regard, were you more conservative and trying to like follow the road that others were already doing? Like, you looked around, you saw other coaches coaching a certain way, and because you probably didn't come right out and were not Sully right from day one.
No,
right?
No, I followed other coaches, how they drilled. Probably, I'd say
even how they talked or how they interacted with.
How he taught, yes. And I would say the main thing for me was getting comfortable the first 5 years on how I disseminated information, not necessarily coming up with my own program. I was imitating, coaches that I liked and trying their styles, right? So I would see my boss, who is awesome, Daryl, my idol, and good friend, and I would watch him coach. I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm going to try. I was like, can I try that? I'm going to steal your drill. And he was like, sure, go.
But also, even in the way that you talk to students, I'm sure
I would try it. Right.
You modeled. Did you find yourself modeling that sort of like the way maybe Daryl would have talked? Like, I don't know Daryl's coach or whoever, but I'm just saying, did you find yourself doing that? Yeah,
But I was trying to find my voice within a sport I had not been around for a very long time.
Yeah.
So, but I'll tell you though, over 5, and there was another guy who helped me a lot also, another coach from Winnetka. And he was really, he would give me props he used to use when he was older, and he'd say, here, I used to use these props. You might like these. I saw you were doing this drill.
Oh, that was cool.
And he taught next to me.
Yeah.
And he would say, hey, did you ever think of this though? And I was like, oh, but he was great also. And I had a lot of guys and there were other coaches that I just didn't jibe with, but I would watch their styles and say, no, that's not me. That's not me. So, and I was just devouring reading. I've read every tennis book from like 1925. I just like old tennis books. I like looking at the old drills. Like I really found something that I found really interesting on a different level than athleticism.
Well, there's an artistry to it. It's not just, that's the whole point of Tennis Rockers is calling it. It's an artistry.
Yes. So I didn't want to let myself off the hook and just say, well, I'll just do it their way. So over the course of 5 years, I started developing my style of running a drill, right? Of running a class and how I taught. And
well, at some point there had to have been a realization too for you where it's like, okay, well, there's the Daryl style and there's the Bob style and there's the Phil style or whatever. Maybe I got to have my own style.
Well, I'd hybrid. I'd cherry pick here and there.
Yeah.
And then over time, I was like, I'm not enjoying this. Even if because my thing is also, I've worked enough jobs where I was getting money but killing time.
Right.
And I'm not a time killer.
Right.
I'm not that guy. I need to sit down and have a conversation. I need to connect. I need to find it interesting for myself. I can't just phone it in.
But I think it's important when you talk about that. I think it's also important to call out the fact that your personality today was not the personality that you brought in those first 5 years. You probably,
I think it was more abrasive, I think, actually. I think I've actually figured out how to amp it up while toning it down in a better way that's more effective for people, that's funny, and it lets them relax. Whereas I think I was guilty of making people feel stupid. Right. And I don't, right, and not by saying you're stupid, but like, no, it's like this.
Right.
And the minute you do that, it's like, right. And I became really self-aware. My goal, I think, was self-awareness on the court of myself as a coach, because I always knew I do not come from an elite background of sports. I'm a club player. I'm a social player. So I also started getting better. So I didn't let myself off the hook, right? I had this thing where I was like, how can I teach these people how to be better tennis players? And I'm mediocre. I need to bring it. I need to get better. So I sent myself on a mission to get better every year. And I used to write all my drills out meticulously, where I'd write out like, I'm going to do this drill, then at this time, I'm going to do this drill. And that didn't work because people don't learn like that. And, you try to say, okay, we're going to do.
Well, as soon as you bring people into the equation, they're not machines. So
and what looks good in writing isn't necessarily good in practice.
Right.
And so you have to learn that. But you also have to have a sense of humor with yourself and your students, where you say, you know what? That's not going well. We're going to change. I had a plan. So over time, I've gotten really good at becoming more self-aware of how my behavior and attitude on the court affects my students' learning. I've become really adept at creating my own drills now and seeing how to scaffold, meaning if I introduce a topic either in a private lesson or in a class, where the next Lego piece would go. How do these connect in a bigger picture? And I have a feel for when to move that forward with a student and when to dial it back. And I'm also trying to create an atmosphere on the court where my students can say, can we not move ahead right now? Can we just stay right here? Can you re-explain that? One thing I say, one of my students gave me a t-shirt this year, hilarious, as a Christmas gift, that says, does that make sense? With a question mark. And I say that all the time. I will explain something and say, well, the Magnus effect is when your body's moving forward, when you hit the ball, it's going to create this drag on the ball. It's going to go down. And does that make sense? And some people would take that as like, does that make sense, you idiot? It's not what I'm saying. When I ask that, does that make sense? Really, I'm not asking you if you understand it. What I'm asking, did I explain that to you in a way that you understand it?
But it also creates an intellectual marker for your students to be able to sit there and go, okay, we're at the end of this. this period of this section that my coach wants me to get. We're at the end of it. So you're creating an end marker for them.
Yes.
Which is very important.
Yes.
Because the thing is, if you don't create end markers, an hour lesson just looks like a big mess of stuff.
But then
it becomes overwhelming, right?
And with no end marker, there's nowhere to go. You can't build off of it.
You can't scaffold
At all. No. And some people don't see scaffolding connections. That's the hard part also. You can try to say, well, do you see how A goes with B? And people will always say, yeah, I see it. But there is a disconnect between the mental connection and the physical connection.
Absolutely. And I think that is yet again.
Isn't that tennis rockers though? Rock my brain, rock my body. That's what we're talking about is how do we bridge that gap between mind and brain and body, right? We have these and not just with a student, I think with our coaching also. How do you get that? How do you get those two things to connect that translate to lifelong tennis players socially, elite tennis players nationally, and world titles to elite players and national titles? And how do we, and a collegiate level at, Grand Slams, how do we get Americans to win? Right? Like all these things. Like I think these all have value, but how do we, there's definitely a disconnect, I think, which you and I have been trying to hammer out, between students understanding concepts and physically getting them and applying them, as well as coaches on how we're coaching and how we disseminate that information and bridge that gap.